Hello friends, welcome back. Hope you're doing well. And I've got a photo today from Iceland and I'm going to walk through an edit. And it's really, honestly, it's kind of a simple edit, but that's because there are really three different things that I'm thinking about when I'm editing a photo, and using or keeping those three simple ideas in mind can really give you a huge impact on the end result. Let me go on into it. Here's a photo. Now, the first thing I want to do, of course, is go into Develop Raw. You can see there's some vignetting and things like that. Develop Raw is always the place to start. Always, always, always. Start with a raw file. And in this case, I'm going to start with optics, which is down here. And this auto distortion correction just really does a fantastic job. And boom, my distortion is fixed, which is great. But in doing so, that removed the vignetting on those edges. So that's clean and looks great. Now, overall, the photo is just too dark. And the first thing I want to talk about is light, because if you're keeping light in mind while you're editing, regardless of where you are in your editing, because even if you're playing with color, you can change luminance values of color and things like that, it's going to impact the overall look of the light in the photo. So light is number one, and I always keep that top of mind. And even if I'm doing, like I said, a color tool or a detail tool or something like that, light is still prominent in my mind. So it's the common thread that ties your entire edit together. Now, I do like to hit the J key, which I just did, to activate the blinkies, if you will. These are kind of the overlays that tell you if something's blown out or just completely black. And in this case, I've got a tiny bit of black in that foreground, but I'm okay with that. A little bit of that doesn't bother me, even though I've just kind of gotten rid of it. And what I'm doing here is just basically going through some simple maneuvers that, just allow me to kind of balance the light. Because for me, starting to Develop Raw is about balancing the light and getting really the best starting point. I think that's the way I'm thinking of it, essentially. And so I'm going to go ahead and also adjust the temperature a little bit. So I'm going to go to, I always have trouble getting that accurate. So if you didn't know, you can just type into that box. I'm going to go to 5586 is what I ended up with. And my tint, I move it just a couple of points from 14 to 16. And vibrance, I go to about 7. And you may have heard me say this before, I don't do a lot of color work in Develop Raw. I prefer to save color work for later, and we're going to talk about that in this video. And sharpening, I'm going to go like, 16, 17, something like that. Bottom line, my photo started like that, which was, the edges were messed up because of the distortion and the vignetting, and a little too dark overall, a little too dark in the foreground. And now it's honestly just looking a whole lot better, just way better looking photo. So I'm going to go ahead and close Develop Raw and moving into my second idea. So the first idea is light, and it is a common theme, as I said. The second idea is really detail, and I've talked about this in multiple videos, but one of the things I like to do is when I'm playing with Structure AI is keep in mind the light. It ties back to theme number one. Light is theme number one, but it's really the major theme throughout all of it, as I've said. But I'm going to use Mask AI, and I'm going to let that identify the different sections of the photo, because I want to identify just the the sky and the water. Mask AI is great at picking those things out pretty quickly and usually pretty accurately. Now, it's not perfect. You can clean it up with a brush, because if you weren't aware, you can use Mask AI, and you can see it needs to be cleaned up a little bit in some of these areas. And what you do is you just back up, you go get brush, and you get erase, and then you can just come over here and erase it from like that iceberg, for example. That's not water. That's not water. Let's pretend that's not really water. Shrink my brush, maybe not that small. And I'm doing this kind of rough because it's not a detailed tutorial on masking. But I just wanted to give you an idea that you can stack the masks. So Mask AI to identify things, brush mask to clean it up and kind of make it a little, cleaner, I guess. So if I go to Mask Actions and Show, remember, red is where your mask is applying, which means that's where your edits are going to apply. So I'm pretty good there. While I'm at it, I'm going to hang on to that mask. So I'm going to click Copy, because I'll use that again. And what I want to do is go in here, and I'm just going to drop the structure like a -25 or something like that. This is me just smoothing out the sky and the water. The sky was already, it had a little bit of texture, but not a ton, even though it has some nice clouds in it. And the water was already pretty glassy, which I like quite a bit. But I just smoothed it out a little bit more, just a personal preference. I'm going to close Structure. I'm going to open it again. I'm going to go into Masking, Mask Actions, and Paste. But this time, invert, which means I just flipped that mask. So if I click Show, It's going to cover those icebergs there, kind of in the middle of the frame, and of course the foreground. And you guessed it, this time I'm going with positive structure. And even though I'm using structure here, keep in mind the light, because you will notice that when I increase structure, it's brightening that area. So that's something to think about when you're playing with the shadows and the blacks and the whites and all those kind of things in Develop Raw, that I don't always go as far as I may want to, especially if I know I'm going to go ahead and use something like Structure AI in those areas, because it will brighten them. And then your photo may get slightly off. And if it gets off, you can either dial that back in Structure AI or go into the Edits tab, essentially your history, go back into Develop Raw and make adjustments. Anyway, that's how that worked. I'm going to hit the J key because I don't really need that overlay. I'm fine. Nothing's really blown out. There's a tiny bit that's completely black. I don't really care about that. So I've added a little structure to the icebergs and the foreground rocks, and I've removed it from the sky and the water. So I've got a pretty good looking photo so far, before and after. I've been focused on light and I've been focused on detail. Now, the third thing that I always keep in mind and that I'm always trying to work with is color. And I do this last on purpose, because if you do color early, like a lot with Develop Raw, or do Develop Raw and then jump into color tools, what I find is that when because light is a common theme and I'm always massaging the light with different tools throughout my edit, if I do that after I've done color, it's going to impact color more significantly, because color is impacted by contrast. And so I just keep that in mind. I tend to like to do color last, except there's a little bit of a gotcha there. I'll tell you that in a minute. But so far, I've got that. And what I want to do is play with color. So one of the things, not one of, I would say the key thing really that I think about when I'm playing with color is that I don't want to do too much. Now, I'm going to use several tools here, but I don't use them to a high degree. I recommend if you want to use a tool a lot, just use one tool. If you're going to use multiple tools, use them in small amounts, simply because as you stack edit upon edit upon edit, it adds up, my friends. It adds up. And so I'm in highlights with toning, and I went to about a 10 in the highlights, which is really, and you can barely even see it, to be honest, but there it is before, and there it is after, just a slight enrichment of the color in the highlights area. I'm going to turn that off. And now that I'm done with that, I'm going to go to golden hour, which is down here in landscape. And I'm going to go to like a 20 or 22 there. And all that does is take those warm tones, give them a little bit more pop. So before and after. And this was a beautiful sunset in the glacial lagoon called Jökulsárlón, something like that. My Icelandic is terrible. But anyway, it's a beautiful place, and it's just really interesting to shoot, because you have these, if you get a nice sunset like this with some nice warmth in the sky, you can get that mirror-like glass reflection. But the contrast between those warm colors and the really cool colors of these icebergs, notice I've done nothing with the blues, and the blue in the iceberg, it's like that blue. It's just interesting. So there's good color kind of contrast going on, and I'm kind of playing that up by trying to warm up some of these colors. And the other thing I like to do with color is go into color harmony. And in brilliance and warmth, I'm going to do like a really low, like a 4 on brilliance, and maybe like a 6 or a 7 on warmth. And then in split color warmth, I'm going to drag warm to the right, so like about a 5, and cool to the left, which is like a -5. So all that's doing is telling the warm colors to get slightly warmer and telling the cool colors to get slightly cooler. So I've kind of hit my quota on color tools, which is color harmony, but 2 tools within color harmony. So that kind of counts as 2. Plus I use toning, that's 3. Plus I use golden hour, that's 4. That's really a lot of color work. But you can see this last little bit in color harmony, even though I only went 4 and 7 in the first one, and then 5 and -5 in the second one, and I did nothing in color balance, I went from that to that. So that warmth is really popping, and I feel like the photo looks really nice. So if you look at the before and the after, I've been focused on light first, which was Develop Raw. I also want to pause and point out I did not use super contrast second. I do that 90+% of my videos and in my edits as well. I'll go Develop Raw and then super contrast. In this case, I experimented with super contrast. It didn't really do a lot for me the way I was moving the tools around, and I felt like I don't really need it. And so I make a lot of statements here about what I do and how I recommend things, and yet it's incredibly important, I think, that you kind of find your own way, experiment, and don't just do something because I say it's a great idea. Try it and see if you think it's a good idea for yourself. Maybe sometimes it is. Maybe sometimes, like in this video, it wasn't a good idea to use super contrast. So I completely skipped it. But I had that photo and I was done. But then, as I said, light is a common theme, and I really, I don't know how many reallys that is already, but I really like the idea of coming back kind of one last time. And this is a touch-up kind of thing that I like to do at the end of an edit, and that is go get develop one more time and just take a look at, hey, what else could I do to the photo to give it a slight bit more oomph? And I don't mean drag saturation to the right and jack up the colors or crank the detail. It's mostly about the light. I may sometimes, I'll do a little temperature, tint, saturation, vibrance, maybe a little bit there, but my colors are pretty good. This one's really going to be about the light. And so in this case, I bumped the exposure a little bit, about 0.22 or something. This is a good time to hit the J key again. So J, I picked up a tiny bit of blown out highlights right there. Well, that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and play with contrast a little bit because I like to have a bit of contrast in my photos. You can see I'm bringing back a little bit of the blue here in the little crevices between these rocks. It's so minuscule, I don't care. But I do see that this little section of highlights is growing, so that's a good time to come in with the highlight slider and pull that down a little bit. So, -10, -15, something like that. That works just fine. And if you want to, I'm going to hit the J key again. I don't need that anymore. And if you want to, maybe slightly lift the shadows. It's going to give me a little bit better visibility into those rocks. This is a minor global touch-up kind of edit. So before and after, it was a little bit too dark, but I think I brightened it a little too much, maybe a little too much contrast. But let me hit the J key. This is a good thing to I turn it on and off during my edits. I'm really looking for highlights here, which is in the sky, maybe in the reflection, but really the sky is going to be brighter than the reflection. So if you're okay in the sky, generally you're going to be okay in the reflection. There's a little bit of that blue showing up in the rocks, which means that's complete black. I don't care. So J key back off. So a slight adjustment overall before and after, just a final touch up to the light. And now, if you look at the overall before and after, before and after, before and after. Now, there's many other things you could do to a photo, and I will freely admit, I might sit on this for a day or an hour or a month and come back and say, ooh, I really should have done X, Y, or Z. But this video is really about how do I approach the edit and what are the 3 things that I'm always doing and thinking about when I'm editing, which is light, detail, and color. And in that order, even though light's a common thread and I did more light at the end, you could kind of guardrail your edit with light and then detail, color, and then light again. It's just it's an emerging kind of fluid bit of workflow that I keep in mind, and things have definitely changed for me over the last 6 to 12 months in terms of how I'm editing and what I'm going about doing. But those are the key things that I keep in mind, and generally speaking, that's how I keep them in mind and how I kind of move things around to accommodate having those things in mind, if that makes sense. My bottom line is I want to get an edit that I like. That's kind of how I edit. And I think anyone should edit. Hey, if you please yourself with an edit, that's a good photo and a good edit. So I keep that in mind as well. But before and after came a long way. Really 3 simple ideas. Only a few tools. Pretty simple approach too. But it works on every photo. So hope it gives you some ideas for your edits. Thanks for watching, my friends. Hope you guys are doing really well. I will see you soon and in the next video, which will be coming soon. So take care, and until then, adios.